And welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we will be discussing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990, directed by Steve Barron and starring Judith Hoag and Elias Koteas. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. We've also got a special guest, like I talked about last time, Mr. Kevin Brackett from RealSpoilers.com. Again, another guy that I worship, another guy that I've had conversations with, and I can't believe that he's... I just think of him as a professional, and I can't believe he's agreed to come on our I like to call it our little podcast. So we'll be chatting with him about Ninja Turtles and all those things that are tied in with that comic book and cartoon and movie. But before we do that, let's go ahead and recap last episode. Again, we had another one of my friends on, Dave Rosen of the Piecing It Together podcast. We talked about Little Shop of Horrors from 1986 and how I know David came down very positive on it. I've seen him tweet that seeing it again, he thinks it's in his top 20 movies of all time. And so obviously he liked it a lot. How did we come down on it? What did you think of Little Shop?
Yeah, we liked it too. I mean, that was a fun conversation. It was a good movie to go back and revisit. I know we liked the Steve Martin scenes as the dentist, and that was a lot of fun. And then we also enjoyed just the look of the movie and how it felt and what they were able to do with the production design and all that. And then, of course, the music and how it felt like we were just there at a Broadway show, watching it, in person. For me, anyway, that's how I felt, like I was watching a show. So yeah. I think it was worth remembering, definitely.
Yeah, and it was nice chatting. Absolutely worth remembering. It's one of those movies, again, I think I mentioned, why hasn't this movie been in my wheelhouse forever, because it's just hitting all the right notes. And it was nice talking about our connection to plays and stuff like that, and recognizing the I think we even talked about Noises Off maybe at some point during the episode about how we covered, maybe we didn't, but that's an episode that we did chat a little bit about our theater experience as far as that goes. So again, fun conversation. I hope that David were able to talk with him again sometime soon. So yeah, let's leave Little Shop of Horrors back in the past. Let's go ahead and move forward with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we'll talk about that with Mr. Kevin Brackett right after we watch the trailer.
All right.
Our family grows. The city itself will be our playground to use as we please, rewarding ourselves and punishing our enemies.
We've been looking for you, Miss O'Neill.
There is a new enemy, freaks of nature. Together, we will punish these creatures.
What the heck was that?
Looked like sort of a big turtle in a trench coat.
Awesome!
Excellent!
Yeah! I love being a turtle!
All right, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from 1990, directed by Steve Barron, starring Judith Hoag, Elias Koteas. Is that how you say his name?
I like Koteas because it sounds cooler, but
it does. But Johnny, we want to welcome our next special guest, Kevin Brackett from Real Spoilers podcast. Kevin, how are you doing?
Hey guys, I'm good. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you, and especially to talk about this film.
Yeah, it's I keep saying this over and over. I've got podcasting idols that I've been following either on Twitter or listening to their podcasts, and you were high on that list. I know we've had our conversations and our little arguments, but I think it's all been healthy. On Twitter it's hard because you can't get somebody's vocal expressions, or if they're sarcastic, or you can't have a healthy conversation, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I just presume you're always angry. Is that right?
Yeah, that is absolutely right. Just constantly pissed off. And then Johnny's like the yin to my yang, I guess you could call it.
It's funny you mentioned that, Darin, because the fights my wife and I have been in over the years have all been about movies. It's always over a movie, so.
Yeah, okay, so realistic stuff. Could be worse. Yeah, I hear that. So
Yeah.
again, Kevin, just being on Real Spoilers, and I think you're approaching like episode 700 or something like that, something unheard of. It's just I like to call you like a titan, or you're the
Oh,
master of everything. So it's just a little bit of backstory. I mean, I did post some pictures of Ninja Turtles, but how that was going to be our next episode, and you jumped on and basically said, "Wow, do you have a guest?" And I thought, would you like to be a guest? And it was just one of those things where, like I said, I have a list of people that I just dream about inviting on, just hoping that you'd be able to say yes to, jumping on a little podcast and having a discussion, and just having you like interested in talking about this movie. I couldn't resist that chance.
I appreciate it. Well, you're very kind, and I enjoy interacting with you online, and I'm excited to have a conversation and at length with you because we are limited by these few characters online.
Yeah.
And with our podcast, Real Spoilers, we aim to tackle the biggest or newest release of the week, what we think will be the most popular, so that people can join in on the discussion. So, there was a time when people went out to theaters and could interact with other humans, and the old ways. And people afterwards would gather around, and you'd go get a beer, go get dinner, or whatever, and discuss movies. And so, we thought of this as an idea to where we give people about a week to see the movie. We release our episode the following week, and it's going to be a new kind of conversation, like you're sitting around with your friends talking about something you just saw. But that means that I don't get to go back to 1990 a lot. I don't get to go back. I'm always excited to be a guest on podcasts that can talk about the movies that I grew up loving and formed my opinion on film. I'm not saying this one did or did not, but it was a part of a very, early on discovering of different films. And this is one that I wore out the VHS on growing up. And so it definitely has a special place in my film history. And it's neat to be able to talk about that with friends and fellow movie lovers because, as much as I love what we do over there, it's a lot of new movies. So we reference the classics and we bring up old films that we like, but it's just a blurb here or there.
Right. Yeah. And you have done special episodes. I know you covered like The Godfather or Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Psycho. Those. So you do get like a chance to go over those.
Well, that came about. That
enjoyable?
it was really neat, and that came out of necessity to find movies to review because when the whole pandemic stuff started, we thought, well, there's no new movies, right? Like theaters actually shut down. There were no new releases. There was no box office to talk about. And so, we came up with the idea. We've always liked to do what we started off calling Real Spoilers Rewinds. The idea was to go back and find a movie if it's a slow week. And then we thought, well, this is the perfect opportunity, but what are we going to do to make it special? We can randomly go back to a movie, but like this is going to be going on for a while. So do we just do random? Do we pick a decade? What are we going to do? And so we came up with the idea that we would do these sequels that people most likely have never seen or heard of. We called the series Unbegotten Sequels. And that's how we started going back to like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and then the sequel to it, which most people haven't seen, called just Butch and Sundance, I think. And,
the early years or something like that.
The early years, yeah, it did have a little tag on it. You're right. And then it was Psycho, but then I think we also went to like 2, 3, and 4, and we had Ryan Alteri, who's always great for horror stuff. And so that's where it came up. Like people, like I did not know there was a Rosemary's Baby sequel.
Whoa.
That just, right? That's bizarre. It's Rosemary's Baby, one of the great horror films of all time. And then it had a sequel, and it was a television sequel. And, we get into it. So if you ever want to hear our take on older stuff, go back and listen to some of those Misbegotten Sequel series. I think it's a lot of fun to just go back and find out movies that you didn't even know. Like The Dirty Dozen had a few sequels to it, right? And it's totally weird because in The Dirty Dozen, spoiler, not many of them make it out, right? So you're like, that's not really a sequel type of a concept, but it's like there's one character that carries on throughout, like Ernest Borgnine is like always there, and then there's one, I don't even remember now, but it's such a small through line with the original cast, and then bringing in new people, whatever. So that's the way that you can discover some fun sequels. But Real Spoilers is usually the new movie of the week. So like we just got done reviewing Moonfall earlier, which was something.
I bet that's the Emmerich movie, right? It's
yeah.
Yeah, I think I tweeted something like, "Oh man, I haven't enjoyed any of his movies since like Independence Day," and that was like his third or something like that.
Yeah, I brought up something on the podcast about that, where I was like, "What do you think the last good movie he made was?" And I mean, it's like Independence Day, and people forget The Patriot,
Yeah, yeah, that too.
which isn't a disaster movie, but it's like those are the two that really were pretty solid. And then after that, I think he's been kind of chasing the Independence Day thing, and
Just not quite getting it. Yeah. So again, I mean, you guys, you go a long way back. I know. Let me ask you a question. Maybe it makes it sound like a new, but I know it's
yeah.
Tom O'Keefe, it's Joey Batiste, it's
Hmm.
Dan Graney, and then Blake Fail. Right? Are those
Yeah,
and including are those the original founders of
that's
Real Spoilers?
yeah, those are the originals. So we Blake and I have been friends for a long time, more than half my life, and we've always loved movies, both of us individually, and then we met working together at Circuit City selling TVs so people could watch all these lovely movies. And we decided to start a film review website. And so actually I've been writing on reviewstl.com for longer than doing the podcast, and we always talked about doing a podcast. And then through Review STL and film critics, I met Tom, and then Joe was a friend of Blake's growing up, and Dan was someone in radio that knew Tom when Tom was in radio. And so we all just, with our love of movies and going to film screenings and everything, we got together and said, hey, let's do a podcast. And the five of us lasted, all five for a couple years. And then Blake dropped out, just due to other things, family, started having kids, life happened, and Blake dropped off. And then Dan, with work and family stuff and all that, slowly just was able to make less episodes. And so, but Joe, Tom, and I are the three that have been since episode 1 through 700. All of us have been on most all the episodes. So it's a passion project. It's a love of movies, and just friends talking about movies that keeps it going.
Yeah. So let me ask you. I mean, first of all, how long has Real Spoilers been going?
Well, our first episode was actually Man of Steel. So we thought, let's start off with a big superhero episode. So that was summer of 2013. And then we thought it would be fun to celebrate. I think it was episode 5. No, it was either 5 or 600. They're all blurring together. But
Yeah.
we decided that we would, as a milestone episode, we would go back and re-review Man of Steel. So I think it's episode 1 and 500, if I'm not mistaken. And it was kind of neat to see where everyone landed. If people were still, we always give Joe crap on the podcast because the episode 1, he says of Man of Steel, I loved it. I loved everything about it. And he just went on waxing poetically about it. And a lot of us were higher on it back then. I am the sole defender of Man of Steel now that's left on the show. But it was just funny because now Joe is on the train of like, they did so much wrong, blah, blah, blah. Superman is his guy and was back then too. But like, he's so much more now. But he just loved that first one. So anyway, but that's what it's all about. Friends, ribbing each other, just having a good time.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about Real Spoilers is you guys have that rapport of like just like you said, it's like you're sitting around with beers or something like that, and you're just
Yeah.
relaxing and just having a chat. And I
It's not real structured, that's the key to what we do, I think, is that we provide that casual environment. We didn't want it to seem too rigid. We didn't want to have a bunch of notes and essays that we're reading off of. And I mean, there are people out there doing all sorts of different podcasts that do amazing amounts of prep and are able to read these amazing things they've written and just sound like experts. And that's cool, and that's interesting to listen to it. And it can be fun, it can be interesting, informative, all that. But with us, we really wanted it to be like, at the bar after the movie, kind of like a book club for movies is how we've always described it. So it's where people can get together after they just watch the thing and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, Jonny and I, when we started NostalgiaCast, I think we started out like doing like a opening credits to end credits like recap. And then I remember we did the Frighteners, right, Jonny? And it was like a 2-hour episode. I'm like, this is like way too. We don't have to do this.
We fell victim to that whole structured thing where we had everything written out and we had notes in front of us and we were like, trying to get everything in there. And I was like, Darin, we got to just be more organic. We got to stop doing these notes and stop following this structure and just kind of talk about it. And he was like, oh, okay, maybe we should do that.
So, yeah, it evolves, right? That's what it is. You go in with one idea, and certainly since 2013, the show has evolved so much. And we just had a deep fried tacos episode, which, I mean, that's a term we coined. I don't expect every listener to understand what that is, but if you listen to our show, you know that a deep fried taco is basically a movie you know is bad, but you love it anyway. So like a Jack in the Box deep fried taco, right?
Oh,
It's not good for you, but it is good. And so we each all the hosts would bring a movie that's one of their deep fried taco movies, and to celebrate our 7th deep fried taco movie, when there was a slow week at the box office a couple weeks ago, we had the original cast on. So that's where Blake and Dan joined Joe, Tom, and myself, and we talked about. So those are fun episodes too, because they're not really like a full movie review. It's just us, waxing nostalgic about some movie we grew up with that we loved and we still can watch today and be like, this is great. And I thought about this before the show, whether or not Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles would fall into the deep fried taco category. I mean, it was successful and people really enjoyed it back in the day. So I don't know that necessarily would fit, but it's close. It's similar. There's a lot of movies like a Ninja Turtles to where, critically people might be rough on, but you just love it because of whether you grew up with the action figures and the where you were, place and time. You know what I mean? So it's similar to a deep fried taco movie, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something we want to talk about. But two, you showing up on binge movies with Jason and things like that, and being able to your knowledge of film, and especially your animated episode where you guys rank like the first 5 Disney movies, stuff like that. It's just so impressive. Just your knowledge there. I mean, what got you addicted to movies? Before we talk about Ninja Turtles, I mean, what got you addicted to movies? Period.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first movie I ever saw was The Little Mermaid in theaters. So I was born in '87, so I might be a little bit younger than you guys, but that was
when was Tom born? Because he's usually the old fogey. When was he born?
Yeah, he just turned 50, but we act like he's 80.
Okay,
he loves all the old black and white stuff. But yeah, he's the oldest of the group. But yeah, it's like, his character, if you will, on the show is the old timey reference guy. Dan was another old timey reference guy. I mean, they're around the same age and grew up together, not together, but they worked together when they were younger. And so they had a lot to talk about. So we always give Tom crap. Like, now that Dan's gone, he's just the guy that talks about all the stuff that me and Joe look at each other like, what is he talking about?
Yeah. And I think Johnny and I are closer to that age. So, even the episode where you guys talked about your favorite directors, and when Tom went off on Howard Hawks, I was like, yeah, this is more my speed.
Right. So, but so like I went to all the Disney movies. I think maybe that's probably why I have such a passion for the Disney and Pixar stuff, is that those were in my formative movie viewing years and me falling in love with movies. I mean, Disney movie was my first movie, like probably most kids my age. Disney was so big at the time, like, yeah, that's a lot of people's first movie. And I fell in love with animation, and then I grew up watching shows like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that really kicked off my love of movies, probably was the animated stuff. And then, just from there, springboard, what can I find? What can I take in? I mean, Batman '89 was a huge movie for me on home video. I mean, I obviously didn't see it right when it came out, but, discovering that when I was younger, and those two movies share, the movie that we're talking about today and Batman, I think, share a lot of similarities too, which, I'd like to speak about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So before we talk about Ninja Turtles, John, did you have any questions for Kevin regarding his history or anything like that?
I think he pretty much covered everything. I didn't really prepare any questions for him. If you want to,
I was not told this was such a formal interview.
I was told this is no math.
Organic.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so as far as Ninja Turtles, I like to joke around with you. You come in and asking, hey, do you have a guest? And I was like, you know what? That would be great. Like, just as a trade-off, just, not trying to play it coy, trying to pretend like,
sure,
just to kind of rib you a little bit. I was like, well, if you could prepare like a little blurb about Ninja Turtles and the history of where they came from. And then we'll talk about like our history of the Turtles themselves. I mean, that just to get that knowledge going. What is that history of the Turtles? What should people know about the Turtles that they don't usually? Where did they come from?
Yeah, the Turtles and Turtle Mania throughout the 90s was such this huge phenomenon that I don't think people really realize, even at the time or even maybe still today, that the Turtles started off as this indie comic book. So many people jumped on the bandwagon when that cartoon hit. It was just like, I think that they thought it's like the cartoon was the original. But going back to 1984, you had Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, and they formed Mirage Studios, and they released the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It only had 3,200 copies, something around 3,000, 3,200, and it's a black and white comic book. It's not the size of a normal comic book. It's like a little oversized. It was just weird, black and white, but it took off. I mean, they had to borrow money from family members to get the money just to print these, a few thousand copies, and people loved it. They bought them all up. They were wanting more. Comic book shops were like putting in advance orders of, how many can we get of your issue number 2? And it's interesting because Laird and Eastman didn't necessarily think that the Turtles would be. I mean, no one could imagine what they would become, but they didn't think that it was even something that would get an issue 2 or an issue 3. They really designed it as an early exercise of just, we want to make comic books, we want to work for ourselves and tell stories, and they made this one book. And to show you how little they thought about franchises and things like we see today in the movie industry, everything's written with the the series of movies, television, whatever, ready to go. But they killed Shredder in the first issue.
Yeah.
Like, you don't do that with your villain, right? So they really were just trying to tell this little story. But yeah, it was a huge hit. One thing that's interesting that a lot of people also don't know, the black and white comic was very graphic in the violence, even though it was black and white, but still it was not a kid's thing, right? The cartoon is what made it that way. So it was a violent comic. And then also whenever they did a color drawing of the Turtles, they all had red bandanas or like the face masks.
Right.
And we know those trademark colors, right? And that didn't come until the cartoon. So moving forward, after this book was a success and they had a few issues out, someone optioned the cartoon series in 1987. It was a 5-part miniseries that basically would go in combination with selling toys, right? So that was the next step. We've got this book. I think it was their second or third issue. They had an order of 50,000, which going from that 3,000 run to 50,000, I think it may have been the second, was a huge jump for them. So they had that, but what was next? Merchandising. And so they did what toy companies did back then, is they made a cartoon series to sell toys. And it was a 5-part series and a dozen toys, something like that, and they took off so phenomenally and started what they would call Turtle Mania, they were like, Laird and Eastman and the people that were financing this stuff were like, okay, when are the next cartoons coming out? And the original toy company tie-in didn't even have plans past the 5, which just seems crazy. But they're like, look at what we're sitting on here. Like, people love this. We can't just stop. And so they eventually, went with hooked up with different producers and everything and people that believed in them, and they made more cartoons, and those took off huge. And so what was the next thing to do? They actually I looked online and they gave me some stats on how many videos they sold of that original 5-part miniseries. Okay. And they said that they had sold from 1987 to December of 1988, 200,000 units of the VHSs, which was a huge amount for this thing that just came out of nowhere. And so instantly they're like, we've got something on our hands here. We need more cartoons and we need a live action movie. So between 1988 and July of 1989 is when production started on the film. So they knew that the timing was there. The cartoon was hotter than ever. People love the Turtles. So filming lasted 2.5 months. It was originally budgeted at $3 to $4 million. It would eventually go on to a budget of $13.5 million. So they overshot the budget a little bit. But the neat thing is about this story, I mean, this is this black and white comic book that found this success. Then they turned it into this cartoon series, which really gave the Turtles a lot of their personalities, the colors that we know today. Again, like that was a cartoon decision. How do we tell them apart? In the comic book, it was the weapons, but in the cartoon, even though they have their weapons, it is a cartoon. They can't do as much stuff with them. So they gave them kids an easy way to tell them apart, and with the toys and everything. Also, 4 turtles with red bandanas, you can't sell that, right? You got to have 4 different colors so they can buy them all. So, this movie had people that believed in the Turtles, they said we're going to do this right, and it went from this $3 million budget. No studio wanted to pick it up. Comic book movies were not doing well. Howard the Duck was one that like just completely bombed, so no one wanted to touch a comic book movie. But they ended up getting people that believed in them, and they got $3 or $4 million commitment from Golden Harvest. They ended up getting the rest of the movie or money from New Line, who would eventually come in and pick it up, and got some more money from Golden Harvest and some other investors. And so they came up with the 13.5 million. But the amazing thing about it is, after all these people told them no, after they got turned down by all these studios, Fox was going to distribute, and then they dropped out, and at the last minute, all these people said no, and then the film opens up March 24th, 1990, to 25.4 million. It broke records for the time of the year for independent production, and it would go on to do close to 200 million worldwide before things were said and done. Wow. So it's this incredible success story.
Yeah, didn't it? Because I think, well, a couple of things. I think, wasn't it the movie that made New Line Cinema? Isn't that kind of the reputation that Ninja Turtles got?
I thought.
Well, the house that Freddy built, isn't that what they
Okay,
always
okay,
say?
that too. Okay, I know, but yeah, that's still pretty big for New Line. I mean, that was the most popular independent movie until like Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, right. So yeah, because like Nightmare on Elm Street was 1984, if I'm not mistaken. So they were around, but Ninja Turtles was huge, and then it crushed the record, for indie films, and then Blair Witch Project was 1999. So you're talking about from 90 to 99, and again, on that type of budget, 13.5 million to make 200 million, which in today's dollars is probably, if not double, close to it. So that was quite the return, and it would subsequently go on to spawn a sequel that made a lot of money. I mean, this movie just started this thing that, I mean, we still see turtle stuff today. It may not be as big as it was in the 90s, but this movie is responsible for a lot of the mainstream success, and kind of hand in hand with the cartoon.
Yeah, there's no denying the impact that the Turtles had, especially this movie. That's a great history of that. But as far as like the history of the Turtles themselves, what is your history with the Ninja Turtles? How did you get introduced to them? What was your first thing that made you fall in love with them?
Sure, it was that cartoon and the toys. I mean, that was for my age group. So, I would have been pretty young, but I was like when the Turtles came out, I was right around the time I was born, but still that TV show ran for something like until 96. It was, right through the mid 90s that cartoon was on. And then of course, I'm sure they continued with repeats and all that, but they were pumping out new cartoons and new toys for my early years growing up. And so I would watch that cartoon. I had the toys, I had all the Turtles, but then I had Shredder and Splinter, I had the Technodrome, I had the Turtle Bus, I had all the original stuff that if I still had it today, they would be worth thousands, because collectors that are nostalgic are all trying to get this stuff. But when I eventually got rid of the stuff at garage sales for $1 a piece, which is like so sad to think of, like my family said, okay, you can sell your toys at the garage sale, and then I use that for video games or whatever. But I had shoe boxes full of the Turtles. We would go to Toys R Us, we would go to Venture was a local department type of store here, and I'd get a new turtle toy every once in a while, and they just added up. So it was that cartoon. I still have some of my VHSs that I grew up with, and I still have a few of those toys hung. I have the Technodrome actually, which is kind of cool. But yeah, that was my introduction to them, and then this movie was right there along with that time period, and so both of them were really formative to my early film years.
Right. It's just it just built to that. Yeah, that's great. Jonny, what about, how did you get? I mean, are you a Turtles fan first of all, or have you how familiar are you with the characters?
Yeah, well, first let me add to what Kevin was saying about the movie and how it took off, or the whole Turtles phenomenon, how it took off. I love the fact that these people just did something that they loved, and you never know what's going to take off. You never know what people are going to really like. And so when you do something that you love and it creates this movement and it finds a home, I think that's great. I hate it when people go out and try to make something popular and then it just fails, because it's like you can't force people to like something just because you want them to. They have to actually genuinely like it. And so I think it's cool that they were able to do that. I always like when these kind of movements are started and when this kind of stuff happens. It's fun to watch. But as far as the Turtles go for me, I never read the comics, and I want to say I watched the cartoon, not like too much, but I would see it on occasion, and but I never really got too attached to it. And I did see the movie, and I want to say that I said back then that I liked it, so I'm going to say that I guess I liked it. But the our show, what we do is we watch things from our childhood, and then we review it later and decide if it's worth remembering or not. And this movie for me is the epitome of that, because when I watched it this time around, I had a really hard time getting through it, a really hard time. And I don't know why it is, why I struggle with this one, but there are just things about it that I was like, I just found myself wanting to make fun of it. And it's bad, and I'm like, well, I know that Darin and Kevin, they like this movie, but I had a hard time with it.
Oh, you got to be honest. That's the other thing about our show and film criticism in general. It's like we all have different opinions. Film is subjective. I think it's so silly when people go online and try to argue with people that say they like something and tell them why what they like is bad. It's just makes no sense.
Yeah. So and my family likes it. My wife's a big fan of this. This was she's also born in the 80s, and she loves this show and this movie. And my kids love it. They dress up as the characters for Halloween often, Yeah. So and they have their names. They know who's Raphael. They know who's Donatello and who's Michelangelo and all that stuff. So I don't want to take it away from them. I sit through it and I enjoy it with them, and we kind of like laugh and we enjoy it together as a family. But as a whole, I would say I have a hard time with this one.
All right. Well, we'll definitely talk about that. For a second there, I thought I saw Kevin's heart break when you can see it visually. Well, as far as the Ninja Turtles go, I was introduced to them. I think my cousin, who's got a good 5 years on me, when I was like 10 or 12, he showed me the comic, the black and white. And it's one of those things, again, when you see Shredder like stabbed through with Leonardo's katana or something, and then he's blown up with a grenade, you read it as a 12-year-old going, should I be reading this? Like, is this appropriate for me? And so that was, but I did like the aesthetic of it and the black and white. It was kind of stark, and it made the silly concept of the turtles seem serious and cool. And then after that, I think before I got addicted, I'm not sure if the video game, the Nintendo Entertainment System game came up before.
I love that game.
The arcade game. Yeah, the arcade.
Well, that's the second one. The first one, I think it was like Tecmo. I can't remember the company that released it, but it was like a side scroller, and you play that, and you go on missions and stuff like that. And
I love that one. It has the overhead view when you go between levels, and then you go into the level, and it's the side scroller. It's so hard, that water level where you're defusing bombs.
Oh yeah, you're swimming.
It's extremely difficult, but I loved that growing up, and I still think it's fun to try to play a level and you realize how hard those old games used to be.
Mastering those. And then you'd like fight Bebop and Rocksteady and stuff like that, obviously the Shredder. My memory of that game is like, you'd end up in the Technodrome and you'd fight Shredder, but the way that I was taught to beat Shredder was you had to collect like scrolls. Like these little like things that you could shoot, and they were really powerful, and that's how
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and so it would take like a while building, like I would have Donatello like build up like 99 of them because you needed them to beat Shredder. And it would take me like an hour to play the game. And then one day I was playing and my stepdad came down, and it was one of his attempts to like bond with me. And so he was like, "What are you playing?" I was like, "Ninja Turtles." And he said, "Well, could I play it?" And I was right at the end when I'm playing Shredder. And so I thought, well, I could have him play. And I beat him before, obviously, but this is just like a test of mine. But I thought, yeah, I'll help you through it. And he played and he killed me. Like Shredder killed me.
Oh.
And so I got mad at him, and my dad, I don't call my stepdad anymore. He's just my dad. But he basically got hurt. And he was like, "Well, I was only trying to help." And he like walked upstairs. And that's one of those memories that I'll keep with me. And I apologize to him to this day because I was just a stupid little kid. But
sure, obviously
there's the game, and there's the cartoon with the theme and everything. And just, I remember there being like a good sense of humor to that game. I remember the Baxter Stockman character. There was an episode based around him. Mm-hmm. And I distinctly remember an episode, and it made me laugh, where there's a shot of him doing experiments, and so it's a shot of a wall and then an entrance door and then a hole in the wall that he'd made by running through it. And so it's just this shot. You see Baxter walk past the hole that he made. He walks past the entrance door that's just made for entering the room. And then he goes to the blank spot of the wall and walks through the wall and makes a hole through it. And I thought that was so clever and funny because it was like, well, that was kind of irreverent for a kid's cartoon. So that's some of the memories that I have with that. And then obviously leading to the movie, that's one of those things where, yeah, I knew the Turtles well enough that I rode my bike I was like, what, 12, 13. I rode my bike down to the local theater and watched it, and just a part of the experience of seeing these Ninja Turtles on screen. And I remember distinctly liking it. And then, like Johnny talked about, maybe 20 years later, I remember watching the movie on home video going, what is this? Like, why did I like this? And it just broke my heart. And then this time again, when we watched it, I thought, well, that I'm going to be critical of it. I don't know what's going to happen, but I didn't have that same reaction. I had, kind of, maybe an ambivalent. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it, but I guess I was kind of in the middle there. Have you always thought the same about Ninja Turtles? Like, Kevin, has it always been the movie been on even keel for you?
I think watching as an adult, and clearly we've all watched so many films since we originally saw it, and even on subsequent viewings, we're always taking in more film, and we're understanding more of what a good movie is with those, objective things, just talking about the look of the film and the script and the pacing and all that. So our opinions change, and what we think a great movie or a good movie is changes. So sure, when I rewatched the movie as an adult for the first time, it didn't have necessarily the exact same appeal that it had as a kid, but I found a lot that I really respected about it, to where I still think it's a pretty good film, to where I don't think it's as great as I did as when I was a kid, but I watch it today and I think that's a good looking movie with really impressive costumes and puppetry, and knowing how much work went into creating these characters, and the fact that they feel like real living beings, like they don't look fake, right? And so many things
Yeah.
today that are done with CG look fake. And I mean, we all grew up in the era of where practical effects were king, and you just loved all these creatures, and whether it was Jim Henson or Stan Winston and all the great puppets and creations. And so, looking back at a movie like this, knowing everything that went into it, and seeing this finished product and how seamless it all is, it's like with Superman 78, where it's like, you'll believe a man can fly. This movie, those turtles look so good that, outside of you knowing it's a movie, I mean, you're looking at it, it's like they exist in this world.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's yeah, I guess my first thought seeing the turtles this time was like, are they believable as turtles? Or are they just believable as men in giant turtle outfits? That kind of thing. I don't know if because on the comic book page, I think it works, but I don't, and the cartoons, I don't know if it like works completely in live action. I agree with you that because I think the mouth movements and just the way everything, they do look real, but they're still kind of off-putting. I know, I know
But I don't think they've ever done it better than this.
No,
Like
and you're right.
This is the crown achievement of, it's the first live action and it's the best live action. And I don't think I'm saying that out of a place of just nostalgia. I go back and I watch the second movie and it's very bad. I mean, if you try to go watch Secret of the Ooze, and that's the one kids liked a lot, I think, for whatever reason, I knew a lot of friends that loved the second one so much, and I tried to watch that one, and that got a horrible reaction. So it's not just like, I mean, they were both nostalgic for me as a kid, but I see things in this first one that, to me, I'm like, this actually feels like an art house film, where it's the tone and the grittiness of it and everything. It looks like a movie, like how Batman '89 was gritty. This movie's gritty, and they do things with I think there were a lot of really talented people involved, and somehow they got the money to do this without really compromising their vision, and that all is apparent when I rewatch this film, and I have a lot of respect for it.
Johnny, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with him. My wife and my kids, we all talked about this after we watched it just a couple hours ago, that the second and third one obviously are not as good as the first one. The animation with the mouth movements, and just you do buy it more in the first one, and it is better. And the second and third one, yeah, they just do not hold up to the first one.
Yeah, and especially I don't know I only watched the first the reboot, the live action, like the 2014. I've only seen the first one, and I don't remember it. I know that I didn't like it, but I don't like particularly hate it. And then the second one, I think I only saw the Out of the Shadows, which you guys, Kevin, you guys covered.
Yeah,
and you didn't like, so that was happy, but for me, but
the CG stuff, it just doesn't hold up. Full CG characters like that, in with the live action interacting, just it doesn't work. Maybe it can work for some characters, but for turtles, there is something so jarring about them being CG animated, where even though these creatures are like nothing you've ever seen before in real life, they're in this first 1990 movie we're talking about, they really do feel like they exist in the world, and they do that by the way the film is shot with a limited color palette. Like clearly they shot with darker colors. The lighting is very natural. They don't have a whole lot of lighting on there, and it allowed them to do things that were really impressive, like close-ups with puppets. Movies did not get that close. The camera would not get that close to a puppet before this movie, because you'd see all the little seams and things. But these Jim Henson creations, which Jim Henson was really doing them a favor by working on this film. They didn't have the budget. Jim Henson liked the vision. He wasn't okay with the violence, like you were alluding to earlier. He almost didn't do it because he thought it would be a little too violent, but they convinced him that of what they were doing and these characters, and he liked it, and so he did it. And the puppetry is phenomenal. It looks so great, but all those details and the way the mouth moved, like you were mentioning, and the way the eyes emote and all the facial features they were able to control, it's very similar to a Jurassic Park situation where from 1993 to today, you can watch that movie and it holds up because of the practical. They did some amazing CG stuff in there too, but without the practical, it wouldn't hold up. And with this one here, look, this one holds up, but I bet you Michael Bay's 2014 CG Fest looks like old CG, right? That's a long time ago for CG. It's come a long way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, as much as I don't know that the Turtles work in live action, I do absolutely agree that this is the best that they've done. I mean, it's the first one. It is believable. You can tell that it's animatronic, obviously, but it's impressive animatronics. And like you said, they emote and the way that they talk, and it's they get it right, and you do believe that they are turtles. So I will absolutely give it that.
Well, and I want to say too, and they pulled off tricks, like, so the director Steve Barron had this eye. He had done music video work, and so they hired him thinking he has a really good eye for this stuff, which he did. And his instincts with filming it with the darker colors and the low lighting and all that allowed them to use these puppets to the best of their ability and get up close and have them emote. There are emotional scenes in this movie that I really do feel still hold up and work in this world they've created. So the director did some really neat things as well with frame rate. He actually would drop the frame rate down. Cinema's usually 24 frames a second. He would do 23 frames a second, which allowed the Jim Henson puppetry to look more realistic because of the change in the frame rate. And then he shot the action films, like the actual when the turtles are doing flips and fighting the foot and all that stuff. He would shoot that at like 21 or 22 frames, which is a Hong Kong cinema technique that they would use in their action movies. So he did a lot of things that really made these work. I mean, without him, without the writers and the right actors, like, it all had to come together. And I think it's one of those really neat success stories where it's like these two created this labor of love, like Jonny was saying, and then it explodes with this cartoon because someone believed in them and knew the toys would sell. And then someone said, this could be live action. And then, they got all these people together that, like, if Jim Henson said no, this movie is horrible. I mean, I'm just saying, maybe not, but I don't think they were going to find the guy that's as good as Jim Henson, right? It just wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, it gives it that extra level. I like that you brought up Steve Barron because he did direct, like, he directed the Take on Me, which is a very innovative video. He directed Money for Nothing. Jonny, he directed, which Def Leppard music video did he direct?
Let's Get Rocked.
So Johnny's a big Def Leppard fan, so I know he likes that. Do you think that, Kevin, do you think that this, a couple questions about what you're just talking about, do you think that there's a music video influence to the movie? I mean, I know that comic book movies weren't really the biggest thing and aren't as nailed down as they are now. Do you think that they try to infuse like a music video aesthetic into the movie to make it more popular with audiences of the day?
It's hard to say because there aren't a lot of musical elements to the film, and the score, well, I think the score is good for what they're doing, but I can't think of a real memorable score in the film. So, it's not really that musical. I think it's just music video directors have an eye for interesting and that's why so many of them become film directors. That's so many of them moved from music video over the years, and I think that really it's just that he had this eye for. He saw, okay, we've got these creatures, we've got these huge turtles. How do we make that believable? How do we not make it look fake? And so, coming from music videos, he knows how to do action and lots of colors and movement, and using that expertise was able to really set the tone, which again, much like if they didn't have Jim Henson, I think if you didn't have someone that understood how to make these turtles look grounded and believable, this movie's ridiculous. It makes no money. People say it's stupid as opposed to cool. It's so easy with just one different director, one different, person working on the costumes, you name it.
Yeah, right. So, Johnny, I mean, being a music person, like the music video influence, did you see any of that kind of getting an opposite kind of feel for it?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I can see the influence there. I definitely can tell that during the fight sequences, you can tell that like he had a music video esque style to it. Like sometimes like Raphael would charge the Foot Clan, it would like speed up or do some kind of like jerky motion or something. Very music video ish. So I can see definitely the influence there.
Okay, and I think maybe that if that is what the point was, it was kind of because that's what audiences I think wanted at the time, that kind of music video kind of. So I don't know. I'm just trying to get a feel of, since they weren't big on comic book movies, if they tried to lean into the music video kind of side of it. But the other thing too, Kevin, you brought up Batman '89. And since this Batman came out the year before this, do you know, or do you think that this movie, because of the darkness of it, was it influenced by, I think Roscoe Lee Brown, I think is the guy's name that did the production design for this. But do you think he was influenced by Anton Furst's Batman when he made this movie?
That's, it's hard to say because production on these things, I mean, this started in July of '89 production. Of course, they're doing pre-production before that. So it may have been more of a coincidence or more of a product of the time, just how, like, when you look at comic books of the era, how things were getting darker, which was definitely an influence on Tim Burton's Batman, because he's looking at Frank Miller's stuff, and it's just the direction things are going. So I don't know if there was a direct correlation, but they sure did come out at almost the same time, and they have a similar dark and grainy look to them, where I think they both excel in those areas, because just like how the lighting and the look of Batman really makes Batman scary and makes Gotham look lived in, I felt like these turtles were, even though a little bit was filmed in New York, but a lot of it was on sound stages, and I still think that it looked lived in and real, and the lighting and the atmosphere is what does a lot of that.
Right. Johnny, do you think there was a Batman-esque influence? Obviously, it's the sewers; it's going to be dark. But do you think that kind of played into it, especially since, I don't know, Batman came out so soon before this? What do you think about that angle?
Yeah, I guess I can kind of see that. I do think they put a lot of time and effort into the production design. You can definitely tell that a lot went into it. Like Kevin was saying, I think it did create that ambiance and the atmosphere, and it did feel like the world that Turtles would live in. So I definitely bought it.
Yeah, I'd want to apologize. It's actually Roy Ford Smith. I just looked down at my notes, and I said Roscoe Lee Brown, who's like an actor. So I apologize.
Oh, okay.
I take that back. But yeah, Roy Ford Smith is the art direction of this. I think that Batman did influence a lot of things. It's weird that after Batman became such a success, I know it's commonplace to complain about this, but instead of doing, comic book movies, they went down the route of like pulp movies like The Shadow and Dick Tracy and things like that. But Batman being a success and the Ninja Turtles kind of being a darker comic book, I don't mind if they did use Batman as an influence. I think that's a very strong aesthetic to go after. And then, Kevin, maybe get your feeling on this, but with Batman, I know the first production design, it's kind of skewed and it's expressionistic, and that kind of ties in with the personalities of the Bruce Wayne and the Joker characters in that movie. And so the production design is of a piece. And in this movie, I thought that the production design didn't have that kind of expressionistic thing as much as, oh, I believe this is a sewer. I believe this is a place like a Pleasure Island type place where kids would end up. I do believe that this is a rooftop, things like that. I mean, does the production design do anything for you other than just looking good?
Yeah, I don't think that there is as much of that expression like you mentioned in Batman, but what it does make it do is feel grounded and real, which I think is really important when you're taking characters like this that could feel so out of place. And so I think it works really well here, where Batman may be saying more, but these turtles still they got us to believe that you've got these four giant sized turtles that are fighting and living in New York, and there's humans that are interacting with them, and it doesn't just look completely ridiculous. It was important to get you to feel like these turtles could exist, and I think that the sets are very detailed, like you're mentioning. I think they used so they're supposed to be in a sewer, and they couldn't get access to any sewers. I think they used an old subway station that wasn't being used as the set, so it still had the tunnels and such that they could decorate like a sewer, obviously. But when you see them walking through it, you see water and you see old trash dumped all around. Like, they really put in the detail where they could have just filmed a dark sewer with hardly any lights, or like a tunnel without any of these details, but you see it all on the screen.
Yeah, and I like that too. I mean, like I said, it's believable. There wasn't a minute that I didn't believe that they were where they were at, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I do like that, even though it was aimed more at kids, because the cartoon definitely did take the grittiness of the comic book and make it more kiddie-like. But I did like that this movie followed the format of that first issue, where it's, the turtles, it's April reporting on the Foot Clan or whatever, and then she gets in trouble, and the turtles come to her rescue, and Raph loses. Does he lose I can't remember if he loses his sai in the
Yes, he
comic.
loses his eye.
Yeah, and so that follows that, and then it ends up, they talk about, they meet Splinter, and he tells them about their history, and it climaxes just like the comic book does, with on a rooftop where they're fighting Shredder. So as an adaptation, I like that it did follow, and then I think it like interwove like some other things from other comics.
Yeah, they basically they knew that they had this hot property on their hands that they needed to make a movie and strike while it was hot. So they looked at the comics and they said, well, look, we've got scenes of our movie right here. And so they really did pull a lot, even though the colors, the orange, purple, blue, red, that came from the TV show, and the personalities were developed more in the TV show, and Michelangelo, being that party surfer kind of thing, a lot of that developed with the cartoon. But they pulled a lot of the story, like you said, from the books. And so I think that's why it's a really neat amalgam of the two, that it's like you got the fans of the comic book, they're going to be happy. The fans of the cartoon, more aimed at kids. And you get a movie that really, I know that maybe it seemed a little more violent for 1990, but overall, kids were seeing this movie and it was okay. It wasn't overly violent, I don't think. And certainly today it is fine. So you got the best of both worlds, something that the adults could enjoy taking the kids, and the kids certainly, and then the comic readers could see these guys brought to life and in a believable fashion.
Yeah, I think it was even in the like we mentioned before, the episode of like favorite directors that you guys did. I think you talked about Zack Snyder, and it was you or it was somebody else that basically said that, well, we've got storyboards right here. We can just take the frames and use this as our movies and translate those. And so
Certainly. Well, look at Watchmen for example. I mean, Zack Snyder brought that to life, right off the page. So much of that movie is like the graphic novel or the comic book, and it's amazing how you've got your storyboards. They are the comics, like you said. That's literally what they're doing. It translates pretty well. So use what worked there. Now, of course, it can't always. Not everything can work. It doesn't all translate. So I get them changing things a bit. But yeah, I think they realized what they had. The budget was limited. Time was limited. And so yeah, you see a lot of that in this movie.
yeah, absolutely. And then, it's not like, with the violence we talked, it doesn't go too far. It's not like the Ninja Turtle. I think the second one where they weren't allowed to use their weapons like at all.
They really toned it down after the first one. Like, this one is not that violent, like you said. It's not bloody violent, and it's very limited. Like when they're fighting with their weapons, of course. The main problem with these weapons is they are these killing weapons.
Lethal.
So how do you get them to do this in a kids movie or cartoon? But they basically hold their weapons and they hit them or kick them or whatever, and you don't really see much of anything. But yeah, they were like, totally against weapons in the second one. So watching that as an adult, that's another reason why it seems so silly.
So weird, yeah. The reaction when this movie first came out, I know that we were talking about the violence and the Siskel and Ebert review and a bunch. I remember them just talking about how violent like it was for a PG movie, and I kind of want to talk about that for a little bit. But as far as the violence goes, especially compared to what we've gotten in the years since, with the 32 years since this has come out, it is like it has the violent moments, but I just think that it's offset by things that are comedic that make it not violent. Like there's a part where the Foot Clan attack them in April's house and her shop, and they have like the nunchuck off, which kind of takes some of the edge off of it and doesn't make it quite as scary. You have obviously Casey Jones, the Koteas character, running around and dropping quips. And then in the end, I thought it was funny because the climax of the movie I didn't feel like there was a lot of tension because there was a lot of jokes to it. Even when Shredder comes in and he's a threat and he's taking them out one by one, it cuts away to Koteas with the orphans. And then it cuts back to them fighting on the roof. But it's a shot of the turtles like conversing and huddling up and figuring what they're going to do. And you see Shredder in the background, like just wandering back and forth. And it's kind of silly, but it's funny. But it does take the edge off of it so that it's not violent. Does that make sense? And
I think a lot of that's the comic book kind of humor too, right? So like they do things in comics that are not necessarily grounded, but they get a lot of humor from things like that happening, and it translated to the screen. And I agree with that 100%. They really offset the violence with these comedic moments and made it entertaining for kids and adults. There's silly stuff in the movie that we recognize just being so silly, but I couldn't help but to be like, but that's fun. It's a kids movie. It's pretty entertaining.
Yeah, as opposed to the Batman, which is more of an angry movie and the more violent because it kind of reveled in that. Johnny, what did you think about the violence in this? Did you think it was violent? Did your kids think it was violent? Did your wife have a problem with the violence?
No, I wouldn't describe it as violent. I guess, technically there is violence in it, but the violence is so cartoony that I wouldn't say it's violent, in my opinion, anyway.
Well, it's Ninja Turtles, right? I mean, how violent can you get?
Well, this reminds me of when in the 90s when they were coming after The Simpsons for being so raunchy, and now we have South Park and Family Guy and, all the endless, adult humor that kids, Rick and Morty, that kids obviously gravitate to. So it's the same thing. It's like in the 90s, they thought The Simpsons was edgy, which is so tame by today's standards. And they called this violent just because they were looking for something to go after. Look at, there's got to be a reason the kids are messed up. Oh, these turtles are punching each other. It's got to be it.
Absolutely. Well, Johnny, coming from an acting background too, what did you? The main thing that I noticed with this movie is the acting it's exaggerated. It's not quite as realistic as you would get in later comic book movies. But what did you think of the acting, Johnny, as far as that went? Did you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely over the top. I think everyone was over the top with their characters. It wasn't really like they weren't really going for like realism. You know what I mean? It's a comic book movie, so they can be over the top, and it's okay. But when I was a kid, the thing that I remembered most of the movie was the fact that Corey Feldman was Donatello, because I grew up watching Corey Feldman movies. I watched Lessons to Drive, and I Stand By Me, and what was the other one that he was in? That was Lost Boys. Now those movies that I grew up with, and so it was like, oh well, Corey Feldman's in it, so it must be okay. You know what I mean? I did a decent job as Donatello, but I will say this. I think that the Raphael, what's the name of the Raphael actor? The voice anyway?
It is the same actor.
Right.
Josh Pace.
Yeah, there
Josh
you go.
Pace. Yeah. I thought he was just over the top. And every time he spoke, that over the top New York accent was just too much. And I was like, just stop already. Just stop.
But that's his real accent. That's
Wow.
It was still it felt like he was just pushing it too much
sure.
For some reason. I kept feeling like, okay, bring it back a little bit. If I was drinking, I'd say that's just too much. Bring it back.
That was actually one of the reasons, sorry to interrupt you, but one of the reasons he's the only turtle that voices a turtle as well, the in-suit actor and the voice, is because they're like, he made that character and he gave him that accent, and he kind of developed it and would go on to inform a lot of the characterization of Raphael. So like it's just interesting that his performance was the only one they could see, is they're like, we have to keep your voice, and with the body language and all that, no one else could match it.
He's a fine actor. I like him in other things that he's done, but I just think it was just too much for this performance in this role. But also why do we have Michelangelo with like a California surfer dude accent, and the rest of them all have these, New Yorkish accents? I couldn't figure that out. I kept saying, why does Michelangelo go vacationing in California or something? What's going on here? Like, why has he got a surfer dude accent? And there's no continuity there. There's no like, hey, you're all born and raised in New York, and plus you got Splinter, who's from Japan. Why aren't they? Where's the Asian influence? What's going on there? So those kind of things kept standing out to me, and I kept finding problems with the acting, even though it was okay for a comic book movie.
And then you had like Sam Rockwell that showed up too. I thought it was one of those things where seeing him this time, like, is that Sam Rockwell? And I'm glad that he was in it so much, because by the third or fourth time he showed up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Sam Rockwell. I could tell. But
and then back then I didn't know who Sam Rockwell was until you see Green Mile and you go, wow, this guy's really good. And then you go back and watch this and you go, you know what? Watching it now, I can see that Sam Rockwell had a career. He had a future. Even though his part was so small, he had a presence. And I think he was probably the best thing as far as the acting goes.
Yeah, and I think Skeet Ulrich and Scott Wolf are also in the cast somewhere, and they did go somewhere.
And then too. I mean, she was okay, I guess, but she was too much. All of them kind of pushed the envelope too much for me. But I'm more into realism, so I have a hard time with this over the top acting thing.
Yeah. Well, kind of a side note, didn't you have a connection to Judith Hoag?
Yeah, I'm in a movie with Judith Hoag. She stars in Halloween Town High, some of the Halloween Town movies.
Yeah.
And I'm an extra in Halloween Town High. And
that's fun.
Every time it comes on every year, my kids play the game. Let's see if we can spot Daddy. So like we always try to find the scenes where you can see me. So
that's awesome. My wife loves those movies. I'll have to look out for you.
Yeah.
His hand, right? Just your hand somewhere in there?
You actually see me in the hallway walking down behind the couple that's talking or something in the school. And actually, our other friend, Ryan Templeman, he's in the movie as well.
Yeah.
And
just because they shot it in Utah, right?
Yeah, and he's famous for
High School Musical.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's really interesting.
Speaking part. Yeah, Kevin, I joke with John all the time because he was in another movie called Saints and Soldiers where you do see your hand, right? So
also with Ryan. Hey, no, I'm in that one too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But Judith Hoag wasn't in Saints and Soldiers, though.
No, she wasn't.
Okay. So that kind of defeats that. Well, as far as, you talked about Michelangelo having that accent. And Kevin, I want your input here is the cartoon, the characters are so well defined, and they even say it in the song. Leonardo's the stoic leader, Raphael's the angry, like the rude dude. They have Michelangelo, who's the party guy, and Donatello, who's the brains of the operation and does. And the only thing I think that the Michael Bay produced, I think it was Joseph or Jonathan Liebesman that directed the 2014. But the only advantage that I think that movie had on this one is that the characters were more defined. Donatello was more of a inventor. In this one, I just had a hard time because I thought Michelangelo, aside from their accents, Michelangelo and Donatello were kind of interchangeable. I didn't get as much. I mean, Raphael is, I guess it's the Wolverine versus Cyclops syndrome from the X-Men movies, where Raphael's obviously the more interesting because he's angry all the time. But I don't know. What do you think about that? How did you think they did with the characters?
Well, I don't, I grew up watching the cartoon, and I don't know if it's hard to separate because they carry it over so well. But to me, it seemed really clear in the movie. But again, I've got all the years of the experience with these characters. So I think they're well defined. And I think that the reason that you can explain it, even though you're like, why would they act differently if they grew up in the same house, and where's Splinter's influence and all that? I guess they've always been billed as they're teenagers, and so they're into consuming media. They're always watching TV and movies, and they're teens, and so they're picking up on different things. Michelangelo thinks the surfer thing. He's watching, Keanu Reeves and Sean Penn and Fast Times, and he's picking up on the surfer vibes. And they live in New York, and Raph is more grounded, and he's angry, and so he's got that attitude. I think that, and especially with superhero and comic book movies, it's kind of like, well, what reason do you want to give? There's always some kind of reason, but at least for them being impressionable teens with this consumption of media and home video, that's how I kind of explain it.
Right. Well, yeah, I do agree that it kind of like mixes like your memories of the cartoon and kind of feeds into this. And so, yeah, I still, you still get that they're brothers. I mean, you still get that they have relationships. I do like that a lot.
Well,
This-
I think you really believe they care about one another. The one of the most impressionable things on a rewatch as an adult of this movie, I think, is when Raphael gets, well, first of all, even before all that, in the very beginning, when Splinter says, "I'm not always going to be here," and I want to make sure you guys have your act together and can function without me, paraphrasing, of course. And it's like, they have this deep conversation with, I think it's Donatello and Michelangelo waiting for the pizza. And, the pizza guy's got 5 minutes or whatever the line is, or when pizzas used to be free if you didn't get them delivered in time. And he's like, they go back to that thing with Splinter. And he's like, what do you think about that with Master Splinter, being gone sometime? And you get that deep conversation there, and you can tell that Splinter is this mentor and like family to them, and they truly care. And you see this emotion come out of these life-size turtle mutants, and you feel it. I think that's extremely impressive, at least for me, because I bought it and I can still feel that way. I think that was really impressive. And then when they go on and Raph is attacked by the Foot, and then they go through that whole antique fight and eventually are recovering at the farmhouse, you see Leonardo depressed and slumped against a door and not leaving Raph's side, and that he's sad and cares about him, and all the trolls are sad and April's sad. So you've got these extremes of, there's this goofy cartoonish comic book stuff going on and quips from Casey Jones and all this silliness. And then you get these real heartfelt emotional moments where, again, with a lesser director, with lesser costumes, you'd look at this and say, you can't make me feel something about these creatures. But I do, and I did. I think it's still believable, even all these years later.
Yeah, that's something that they didn't have to put in. You could show a bunch of Ninja Turtle action; it would have been fine. So the fact that and I do agree with you. I was going to mention it, so I'm glad that you brought it up. The Leonardo, I think that they've lost Splinter, and they've lost another of their brothers, and so he knows the importance of family, and I think that kind of carries over. And they have the Kodak moment, obviously, when Raph wakes up. As far as kind of the comic book movies of the time, I think it's there. I don't. And I think that's the part I like best about the movie, is when they're at the farm and they're bonding, and they have like the metaphysical where they contact Splinter.
Force Splinter.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're able to chat with him like using the Force, right? I like that stuff, and that gave it more of a like an emotional core. But also too, I just think that at the time people didn't know what to do with comic book movies. They thought you just got to nail the aesthetics of it, maybe some character work. There's a part where April, they burn down her antique store, and there's a part where a shot where she looks out the back of their van, and it's a slow motion shot, and she sees it burning, and there's some emotion there. But then they never bring it up again. I just think that for comic book movies at a time, they weren't as in depth with their characters and as far as their stories could go as they are now. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Well, one thing that I think is also impressive about this movie, it comes in at a tight 93 minutes, I believe, with credits. So, we get these deep moments aside with all the action and the comedy. We get these deep moments and the stuff at the farmhouse and all that, and it still is only 93 minutes. So I think without losing their younger audience, they could put more stuff in and characterization and talk about April's home and what happened back there. But really, what's it going to add to this movie, this kids action movie? I think that we get a lot of that already, and it's impressive what we do get, but it moves at a nice pace. It's entertaining enough as it goes on. So I just think that even though this was early on and maybe comic book movies weren't quite as evolved yet as they would become, I think that it still was doing things that we see today and before, a long time before other comic book movies even would. And again, it still holds up, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like that there are some shots that look like they come out of a comic book. I know when Shredder first enters and it's his shadow and it's a long shot and it pans down. That was impressive. I like the shot that got us talking about this is when the turtles, like in the golden hour where they line up and they're talking to April and Casey, and Leo says it's time to go back, and it's just a shot of them. That was very comic booky. Johnny, did you have any specific shots that you liked?
Oh,
that were
just hearing you say the first time you see Shredder, I thought of the first time you actually see him is when he's watching all the TV monitors and he throws the dagger into it. And when it kind of pans down behind him, I kept expecting to see a cat next to him, like Dr. Claw, you know what I mean? It's like, well, where's his evil cat? But what was the question again?
Yeah, no, that was it. You're just trying to find specific shots. I think that does come from a comic book. Kevin, were there any specific shots?
Something that they did with Shredder was when he walks in to talk to the Foot Clan, you know, and kind of like say how, you know, it's an honor to be a part of this Foot Clan, and the second in command comes over and like pulls his cape back and reveals the spikes coming out of his shoulders. I mean, I understand, you know, why that's in there, but it's just cheesy.
Well, Kevin, do you want to counter that, or are there any like shots in the movie that you were impressed by?
I think there are a lot of beautiful shots in this film, and not just talking about shots that look like a comic page, but I think this is a really good looking movie. I really am impressed with a lot of the shots. The stuff at the farmhouse, like you said, there's some really great shots there. But throughout the film, even at the very beginning of the movie, the first time that I think like it really jumped out at me, a shot in the film, is when Raph is peeking out from the manhole before we've actually seen the turtles, before the credits roll and we're introduced to all of them, and you see the police lights from all the crime that's going on, and you see Raph peeking out from the manhole cover that's popped up, and you see the lights reflecting off his eyes. That shot is so cool. It's such a great mysterious establishing shot because we've yet to see the creatures, giving us a little taste of it, but it's a really good looking shot, and I think it was just wonderful to see that. And then throughout the film, again, there's so many different things that come up where they catch my eye, where I'm like, this is a filmmaker, again, with the music video experience, I think, who knows how to make an interesting movie. And so maybe to balance out some of the silliness, some of the lines that are like, okay, that was cheesy or whatever, I'm looking at these shots of this art house movie, this independent film, to where I'm like, I see in this some of the things that I like about other independent films. Like, to me, this isn't just a silly kids movie. I'm like, this is an auteur who has a vision and was able to capture something pretty special here. And so I think throughout the whole thing, there's a lot to take in and appreciate.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Did anybody? I think that kind of covers a lot of the movie. Did anybody have like any final points you wanted to make, or any comments?
I had a point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with the newer Turtle movies that came out, I think they timed it just right as far as like getting the people who fall in love with the comics and the cartoons and the movie back then in the 90s to bring their kids to the newer movies. And I think if that was on purpose, that was perfect because it was perfectly timed. They released it right when these people were having kids and starting their own families. And so I think that was pretty genius move on their part.
Yeah, Kevin, did you have anything? I think in the episode you covered, you talked a little bit about that. I mean, what do you think about that point?
Yeah, it's not coincidence. Certainly, they knew what they were doing. The timing was right with those for sure. I think that we're going to see a lot of this. Well, obviously we are seeing a ton of it, but nostalgia, which you guys trade in, you know all about it. It's kind of this cycle that we're seeing where 10 or 20 years after something debuts, maybe closer to 15, they're not waiting around too long, but we're going to start seeing things that these kids went to. You see it with Star Wars. They keeps rebooting. You see it with all these different remakes and reboots that come out, but these big franchises now, you're seeing Star Wars did it with the prequels, and then it's doing it again with the sequel trilogy. Ninja Turtles is doing it now. It seems like every 10 years they're going to do another reboot. But, they're really smart too, where they keep a franchise alive, where it's different with something like Ghostbusters, where Ghostbusters has these huge hit movies. Everyone loves them, and then they kind of go away. And I know they had a little cartoon for a bit, but, eventually that stuff went away, and then it was just pure nostalgia to get things jump-started, where the Turtles cartoons, even though I haven't seen them all, I haven't seen most of them, but it's almost like they never stopped. And so they kept this turtle stuff alive to where it was not only the nostalgia and the people bringing their kids that they went when they were younger. You've got a fan base that continuously grew and never dropped off, and they kept adding in more and more shows, and they kept doing toys and everything. So it was right time, right place, but also very smart how they never let the franchise or the property die.
Yeah, so it's always present. Yeah, right. Okay. So, I think we've again, Kevin, a lot of knowledge about the history of these characters.
Well, two more. Can I add two more things that I liked real
Sure.
quick before we go?
Let's talk about those. Yeah.
Okay. Other shots that I liked, I should have mentioned this previously, but when April's drawing the sketches of the turtles and it transitions into the live action, I love that. I think it looks really good. And then the other thing was when they're fighting in April's apartment above the antique store and they crash down through and then things start catching on fire and all that, I just thought it looked really good. Like that set with to create all that, they didn't have to go that overboard with the set, but that antique store is covered in stuff. Like they stocked an entire antique store and they were breaking things and there were fires going around, real fire outside the building. It looked really good. Again, adding to that lived in, they didn't just have a cheap set and they said, oh, just throw like one piano and a vase over there and make it look empty. I mean, that antique store, they stocked it up and they broke a lot of stuff. And I think that they pushed this movie to the limits with things like that made it feel real and not just a soundstage or not just a fake set. I thought that was eye-catching with the fire and all the antiques everywhere. And then, let's see. Oh, the last thing was, because we were talking about violence and I didn't get to circle around, I don't think it was that violent, except for the inferred violence at the very end of the movie with what happens to Shredder. I was like, are you serious? Like, they're so nonchalantly at the end of the movie, Shredder goes off a building because he's trying to attack Splinter or whatever, falls into a garbage truck. Casey Jones nonchalantly like whistles up to the garbage truck, and starts compacting it.
Yeah.
Like, Shredder wasn't dead until he got crushed supposedly by a garbage truck.
But he didn't actually die though, right? He's in the next movie.
Because he's Super Shredder, right? But at the end of this, but what they're inferring is that Casey Jones went to a guy that's maybe knocked out in a garbage truck and compacted him alive.
Yeah, he's a murderer.
Yeah, you see his helmet get crushed. Yeah, there's no doubt.
That's insane, right? Like, they finished this kid's movie with compacting a person alive.
Well, I don't know what's worse. Like, again, in the cartoon, like, think Shredder, like, has a grenade and they kick him over the side and he explodes. So I don't know what's worse. Like,
sure. Right. Definitely. No, not as bad as the comic books, but still, I'm like, for a kid's movie, it wasn't that violent. And again, you don't see this. So the kids aren't, the kids watching this have no idea. I didn't know. Like, as an adult watching it, though, to see he comes up and runs the garbage truck, that's where the parents are going, oh my God.
Yeah. What are we watching? Well, you talk about how it looks good, and I think absolutely for 1990 it looks good at the time. It didn't take me as much out of the movie as like some 80s movies do, where they don't quite look as, spit shined as movies today. Jonny, did you have anything? You were smiling a little bit when we were talking about the way that the set looked. What do you think about
No, I like the set. I thought it looked great. I was just laughing at the fact that, like we always saying about Shredder, because we joked about that as we were watching it. He just committed murder.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah. Okay, so are there any other points you wanted to make about the movie that we haven't? Those are great points. We're good? Okay.
Yeah, I think, just to wrap it up, I think that the film, it's not perfect. As an adult, you definitely pick up on the flaws of the film more, but there's also a lot to appreciate that we've talked about this whole episode. I think it's still very impressive what they accomplished from the pages of this comic book and in a few years turning it into what they did and not having it just be a cheap cash grab. There was artistry to this film, from the look of it to the performances. I know they were a bit big at times, but they were also small at other times. And I think that it's really impressive that they made you care about, again, 4 huge mutant turtles got you to actually feel something and be invested in the story, and it looked good. So it is impressive, and the fact that it all worked together with the Henson taking on a project that he normally wouldn't, and them getting this thing made way over budget, and people still believed in them, and look what it's turned into now. Without this movie, I know the cartoon was successful, but I think really it and this movie hand in hand created what we're still seeing today.
Right. And so, yeah, that's what we talk about at the end is, whether these movies that we go back to, are they worth remembering or are they worth remaking? Is it like, are we going to get upset if they try to have another go at it and see if they could do it better? So you're definitely be in the worth remembering camp from what I'm getting of that.
Well, because then you even touched upon it. I mean, they've tried, and I couldn't tell you. I've seen the Michael Bay movies, the Michael Bay produced. Sorry, I know they want to put his name on everything, but the Michael Bay produced Turtles movies, I've seen them. I couldn't tell you really what happens. They weren't memorable. They didn't look good, and I haven't tried to rewatch recently, but I guarantee watching a full CG turtle from 2014 just isn't going to look that good, where we're looking at 1990s puppetry and it looks good, just like 70s Star Wars puppetry looks good, right? It's timeless stuff that is a product of the time, and you accept that, but the feel of it is still timeless in a way that captures your imagination differently than some of this CG stuff does now.
Yeah, and we talked about that before. As far as Star Wars coming out and kind of breaking the rules and creating new special effects, it didn't have, when they redid them as the special editions, those CG creations just didn't have the same effect because we'd seen them do that. They weren't breaking any rules. They were just copying again, I think, what everybody had done before. And it just, to me, it wasn't that impressive. So I definitely see that. From my perspective, it's, maybe I'm coming in the middle here, is I do agree that this is probably the best version that they've had of live action. I don't, especially the way that they copy the comic and it's like a straight adaptation of it. I don't know if there's a better way to do, to do this, to do them justice. I don't quite have the same like affinity for the movie as you do. So I think there might be a way for them to do and not have it be, have the 90s stuff in it and the cheesy, to be able to have that balance. So although I do like it, and I don't think the movie's not out to hurt anybody. It's hard to be mad at this movie because like you said, there is some artistry to it. It is trying to do the Turtles justice. To me, I just think that as far as Turtles go, I think the cartoon probably embodies what I like about the Turtles the best as opposed to this. So even though I don't know, again, I'm kind of straddling the line here, even though I don't know that they could do a better job, I think they could maybe have a better go at it and maybe do it better. So I guess I'm kind of in the middle. I think it's worth remaking just to see, but if they don't, we at least have this, and I guess it worked as much as it could. Johnny, what about you? Where do you fall?
Well, I know it seems like I hate this movie, but honestly, I don't hate it. I just have problems with it. But even though I do, I have even more problems with the Michael Bay produced ones. And so
Yeah.
I can look back on this and say this one should be left alone. It was good for what it was, but just leave it as it is. Let it be what it is, and let it just stop messing with it. You know what I mean? Because they, like I say, I respect what they did. I respect that they created this movement, and they had this idea that became what it became. And I think that should be remembered for what it was, and that should be what we remember, not the Michael Bay ones.
Right. So worth remembering or worth remake? You're more in the worth remembering camp?
Worth remembering, even though I have problems with it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Again, Kevin, like you talked about it, this is a movie to respect. I know watching it my second time, I didn't have any of that. I like that you brought that perspective of, I mean, it doesn't quite maybe stand up to the comic movies of today, and there are cheesy parts, but it does try, it does try to have that emotional like connection with the characters. And so, thank you for bringing that to us and that kind of point of view. As far as you go, though, I mean, you're way more popular than we are. You've got way more episodes. So I know people, but even like if people aren't familiar with you, how can they find you and Tom and Dan and Blake? What is the best episode you've done? How can we get in touch with you and the best way to get the real spoiler experience?
Well, I appreciate it. You guys are great, and I really appreciate all the kind words. If you want to listen to real spoilers, I say just get on whatever podcatcher you use. We're on all of them, and search for real spoilers. And as far as where to start, it's hard to say. We've done so many darn episodes. Like, I mean, if you want to get a taste for what our the OG cast, I guess. I think a recent one would be that Real Spoilers Deep Fried Taco episode number 7 that just came out recently, because you're going to get the OG cast. And if you want to hear more from these people, then you can find other episodes they were on and explore it that way. So that might be a good way. But this is kind of a risky proposition, because, if we didn't like the movie that you love, then you might not want to listen to any more episodes. But I say find a movie that you're really into and want to hear discussing. We've got a lot of them from 2013 to current, almost 700 episodes. Just find a movie that you would like to talk to your friends about, and you would want to hear our opinions and kind of hear a conversation of just guys that love movies and like to talk about them, and just dive in and see if you like it. It's a casual experience, like I mentioned earlier, where we're just just talking, just chatting about what we just watched, and throw in some random references. We go on, we call our tangents conversational off-roading. So we have a lot of little trademarked, things that we've coined over the years. Dan, a marketing guy, is the one that came up with a lot of these terminologies. But we talk about all sorts of random stuff, and you have a nice mix of people, right? So you have Tom, who's a little bit older, and then you have me and Joe, who are the younger, on the younger side. And so you get a good mix of people and personalities. And I will say that there's not a lot of movies where we're all exactly on board, like the exact same opinion. So it's kind of cool that if you come in and you like this movie, maybe I didn't, but Joe did, Tom was in the middle or whatever. It's a good mix of opinions. And so, we don't make too many people angry, I don't think, based on our reviews.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something you can tell that you guys are friends. Like, you can tell that you've had a long history together, because you do have a rapport, and it's very natural. And it's one of the things that I love about that podcast. So
Thank you.
If people could also bring to it, just like you said, people are going to have different opinions. It's not like, especially in today's climate, it's like if someone disagrees, it's like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with you then. And I don't think that's fair, because I think that the differences are what make us interesting. And so, that's, again, just very conversational. I hope that's what Jonny and I, because we grew up together and we're in plays, went to movies, and we bonded over that. So I hope that's what comes across as well as you guys on Real Spoilers there. So again, realspoilers.com, reviewstl.com. Is there any other way that you'd like people to reach out to you?
I'm active on Twitter, as you know, so if you want to join online with the conversation and interact, it's at Kevin R. Brackett with 2 T's on Twitter, and at Real Spoilers, real with 2 E's. And pretty much Twitter's a good way to interact with me. And then if you want to interact with other listeners, we have a Facebook page and we have a Facebook group. So you can find Real Spoilers on Facebook, and then join the League of Show Sharers is what our group is called. So search under groups, and that's where we share the show each week. People comment about what they thought about the movie, what they thought of our opinions, tell us if we're wrong, right, whatever, who they agree with. But it's a really fun group. We have a good community. It's not, some groups can get a little out of hand with trolling and a lot of, crap posting and all that stuff. So it's a pretty good group of people. Really, we have great listeners and a lot of good conversations. So I would say that's probably the number one way that listeners can interact, is the Facebook group.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like, give them a follow on our listeners. Give them a follow on Facebook. Give them a follow on Twitter. Engage. Like, it's fun to engage and have these healthy conversations. And I think that's one of the main things that makes Real Spoilers, why you guys have 700 episodes, and why I hope you make 700 more. So,
thank you.
Again, Kevin, thank you for coming on. And again, I'm going to joke with you here. Thanks for inviting yourself onto our podcast, even though I was going to get around to asking you anyway. And so that did save me a lot of embarrassment, and I appreciate that. Jonny, did you have any final thoughts for Kevin? Any questions?
No. Thanks for coming, though.
Yeah. We really appreciate you. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Darin. Thanks, Jonny. It was a pleasure. I hope to do it again soon.
Okay, absolutely. Thanks.
I have always liked Cowabunga.
Huh?
I made a funny.
And again, we want to thank our special guest, Kevin R. Brackett, for joining us for that. Wow, what a good conversation about Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it was a lot. It's one of those things where you watch a movie and then you're like, well, this is fine. I don't think I'm going to have a lot to say about it. And then you bring somebody on that feels passionate about it, and we talk for an hour and a half. So, again, it was a good, healthy conversation, and I think he brought a lot of good kind of perspective how the movie played, and as far as the public goes, and his perception and audience perception and our perception. But it did. I think we were chatting about whether to do like top three, like because comic book movies are weird. Like they didn't like really hit their stride until maybe the 2000s, like with Blade or X-Men
Yeah.
or Spider-Man. But we could have talked about comic book movies that were released before this, and Superman or Howard the Duck or Batman, which you've already discussed. But you brought up an interesting topic about or an idea about violence in cartoons, or cartoons that cover kind of adult themes, more mature
Yeah.
themes.
Well, we talked about the violence in the meat of our conversation. How it wasn't really violent, even though there was violence in there. It didn't really feel like I was watching something that was violent.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, for me, I don't really consider anything violent unless I actually have like a visceral reaction to it, where you see the blood, you see the gore, or you see something, physically happen to someone, and that's when it's like, whoa, wow, you have like an emotional reaction to it.
Right, right. Okay, so I thought that was a better topic. Comic book movies, everybody's talking about those. So as far as that goes, we did chat again for 90 minutes with Kevin, so it was a while. So instead of maybe doing like a top three, because people are probably tired and want to go to bed, how about we do like, maybe just our top or our favorite example of a movie,
Okay.
whether cartoon or kids movie, that
Sure.
does encompass adult themes, but does it in a way that's good. I know the first thing that came to mind was the Prince of Egypt. I know that we saw that together in the theater. I know that covers obviously the death of the firstborn, and the Jews moving out of Egypt, that kind of, so that's adult. I thought about let's see, Secret of Nim obviously is another one that has some dark elements to it. We talked about An American Tale with Rob, about Crooked Table, about that. But the one that always comes to mind, and it especially comes to mind because I'm not the biggest anime fan. It's just something about I'm not able to get in the mindset or the groove of what I'm not picking up what they're throwing down a lot of the time.
Right.
But there is a movie that just has stuck with me, and it was weird because reading the Roger Ebert review of it, he compared this movie to, it's a cartoon, but he compared it to the greatest war movies of all time. He says it belongs on a shelf or right alongside Schindler's List or All Quiet on the Western Front. And it's one of those things you hear and you're like, a cartoon? Come on, man. And so I went out and I rented it just to see what it was like and whether I wanted to buy it. When I was back in the 90s, I was buying everything up. And within 5 minutes of watching this movie, I was just in. I stopped the video. I went and returned it to Blockbuster. People can remember what a Blockbuster is. And then I went right out and I bought it. And this movie is Grave of the Fireflies.
Okay. Yeah.
From 1988. Isao Takahata. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It's like I said, it's part of the Studio Ghibli studio. I think it was even their second movie. So right out of the gate, Castle in the Sky, and then this, maybe the same year. I can't be too sure. But it's about these two kids during World War II. They're the fire bombings in what's it called? Kobe. Their mom, these two kids, Seita and Setsuko. Their mom is killed during one of the fire bombings, and it's just about the Seita character trying to keep his little sister alive. Like he's a teenager, and then Setsuko is just he's under 12. She's maybe 8 years old, something like that. And it's just about them trying to survive in war-torn Japan, and she's suffering from malnutrition, and it's just so heart-wrenchingly sad, just from the very beginning. The first 5 minutes will tell you everything about it. So I don't know. don't want to spoil it for too many people, but people who have seen it, it's never left them, and it just has moments of magic. Where they're able to take fireflies and live inside a bomb shelter and use that as light,
Mhm.
or the ending where it's, again, I'm not spoiling anything, it just doesn't work out, and it's just heartbreaking seeing say to try and try and try, and it just doesn't work. He just can't do it because he's just not prepared. And so, but that's a movie that I don't, have you seen it? Have you seen Grave of the Fireflies?
Yeah, I had a coworker about maybe 10, 12 years ago introduced me to it. He let me have a copy of his, and I went home and watched it. And I maybe didn't have the same reaction you did. I didn't want to run out and buy it, but I did enjoy it. And I was like, I told him when I came back, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty good movie for an anime.
Yeah, but it doesn't, like, when you think of anime, you think of like Princess Mononoke. You think of
Cowboy Bebop or something.
yeah, something like that. It's just, and so I have a hard time kind of and it's a weird vibe. But this one, just the way that I would compare it to those war movies, it's just very somber, and it's
Yeah.
adult, and I don't know if kids would necessarily like it, but watching it, you're like, animation can do this. Animation can be just as powerful and just as impactful as any live action movie. I know I've talked about this movie a lot on Twitter, and it's a lot of people love it, but kids wise, you have your Neighbor Totoro's, you have your Howl's Moving Castles, you have Porco Rosso, that kind of thing. It's you have all these things that kids can latch onto the imagination, but I also think right out of the gate that Ghibli was able to just nail a movie of this quality. It's just amazing to me. It's one of probably in my top 3 animated movies of all time, just for what it does. So, Grave of the Fireflies, fantastic, fantastic movie.
Okay.
What did
Well,
you have?
I had a hard time deciding on a movie, and I kept thinking about Disney animated movies that have violence in them. And a couple off the top that I thought of were, Beauty and the Beast. When Gaston gets thrown off the castle at the end, or Lion King with Mustafa being thrown off the cliff, and then the fight with the lion. But those are animals. So I was like, well, that's not really doesn't really fit. But then, the Hunchback of Notre Dame that also is very dark, has some very dark elements and themes in it. And they at one point they're trying to get rid of an infant, and so it's
Yeah.
like that's pretty dark. That's pretty disturbing. But then again, being in cartoon, there isn't really a lot of blood being spilled. And so I can't really consider it violence, really, even because you're not really seeing the violent, the gore and stuff. So even though it's dark and it's violent, I still wouldn't really consider it violent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Hunchback is a touchy subject for me. I think we saw that again in a theater.
Yeah, we
You
did.
and
We
me.
saw it. Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, the adult stuff in it is so well done. I love it. I love the adult stuff. I love that they went there. Hunchback, the Hugo novel, it's very adult, and so it's a weird thing for Disney to tackle and go after. But the
Yeah.
the funny thing is, with that adult stuff, it's offset with this kiddie stuff that just pisses me off. I mean, pisses me off. There's no, it's frustrating to see them go like that and then have these gargoyles like Jason Alexander or whatever, like
Yeah.
showing up and trying to be, and he's not funny. He's not funny. You know what I mean? It's like he's
Yeah.
talking about, you go from again, almost killing a baby to him like playing chess with birds or something like that. And then, oh my gosh, it's not like the Lion King where you talked about it. It's Lion King is like a nature program. That's the kind of stuff that happens. It's the
Right.
survival of the strongest, but it's animals.
Right.
And then the stuff with Timon and Pumbaa, it's still edgy, but I find that stuff funny. It's funny in a way that works. The gargoyle stuff just kills that momentum. The part where Frollo, there's literally a song called Hellfire where he's talking about his sexual attraction to Esmeralda.
I know.
Sexual attraction in a Disney movie, he's talking
Right.
about it. And it's like,
Right.
whoa, what are you guys doing? Like, way to go there. Good job. And then immediately it cuts to the stupid ass gargoyles, and it's not funny. And they cuts almost immediately to another song and Lindsay Ellis likes to point this out. They rhyme. Again, you go from a song called Hellfire about sexual attraction, and this guy doesn't want to, he'd rather see her burn at the stake than give in to his sexual desire. And then you cut to a song where they rhyme the word Adonis with croissant is. And I'm like, what is this? Like, pick a lane and stick
Right.
with it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Sorry to get so, I guess,
No,
animated.
I love your reaction to it. That's great.
But yeah, it's just seeing them go for the adult stuff and doing it so well, and then just seeing them back off and chicken out by doing that gargoyle stuff. It's just such an emotional whiplash of a movie, and I can't forgive it. I know a lot of people say that it's so strong that it makes up for that stuff, but it's such a jerk around with those gargoyles and with that off-putting humor and Wizard of Oz jokes and things like that. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work, and it kills that movie for me. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But again, I get what you're saying. Them tackling that adult stuff is fine. And after The Lion King, I guess kids were ready for it. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't talked about Hunchback of Notre Dame in a while, so I guess I've been building up a lot of animosity toward it. Okay. Anyway, so those are our picks. Grave of the Fireflies, again, a great adult, but not, I guess mature is better. Adult is different because adult can be like Sausage Party or that kind of thing. But mature is more themes that they're able to tackle. And kids, even though I don't know if they'd sit through Grave of the Fireflies, it does teach important lessons.
Yeah, yeah.
And then your choice was?
The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Okay. All right, great. So those are some good choices to start with. Again, I apologize if there are fans of Hunchback out there that I've just alienated. But all right, so we had a couple of my friends on, a couple of my Twitter friends, and so let's go ahead and let you pick the movie for next time. What movie did you have in mind?
Okay, well, this is a movie that's been on my list for a while, and I've always been excited about tackling this one. That is Flatliners with Kiefer Flynn and Julia Roberts and William Baldwin and Kevin Bacon's in there, I think.
Is Oliver Platt in that too?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, it's been a while. I did see that one in the
I haven't
theater
seen
with
it
my
for
mom.
like 20 years at least, so
Yeah,
it'd be fun to go back and watch this one again.
yeah, I do remember that's one of those movies where it had a sex scene, and I'm sitting there as a preteen with my mom, just, huh. So that'll be fun to talk about. Yeah, that was even remade recently. I think that.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either, so maybe I'll watch that one as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Again, so Flatliners, I think from 1990. Again, like
In the 90s somewhere, yeah, we'll have to look it up. But
yeah, from Ninja Turtles, same year, maybe close to that. So again, that's a good one. But yeah, let's go ahead and we'll lay all this other conversation about animation to rest, and we'll move on to a more a scary thriller, in a way, Flatliners, for next time. But until then, I'm Darin Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And we'll catch you guys next time.